Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video and commenting where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into these chilling stories. It started as a simple plan, a night hike up Griffith Park to catch the city lights. My friends and I had been talking about it for weeks, and finally, we found a Saturday night that worked for everyone. There was something alluring about Griffith Park at night, the idea of seeing Los Angeles spread out beneath us, all glittering in the dark. None of us had hiked there after dark before, but we figured it would be fine. People do it all the time, right? We arrived around 9:30 p.m., the air cool but not cold. I remember we parked near the base of the park, close to the entrance where the trail begins. There was a bit of a buzz in the air, the usual excitement you feel when you're about to head up into the unknown. There were a few cars in the parking lot, but not many, enough to make me feel like we weren't totally alone, but not enough to make it feel crowded. It was me, Mark, and his girlfriend Lisa. We started off together, chatting and joking about the view we hoped to catch at the top. The trail wasn't too steep at first, but it gradually got more rugged as we ascended. The city lights below us began to twinkle, and the noise from the city started to fade. It was getting darker the higher we went, and soon the glow from the city was little more than a faint halo on the horizon. We were already pretty deep into the hike when I noticed we had spread out. Mark had pulled ahead, moving faster than I was, while Lisa lagged behind, stopping now and then to take photos or just catch her breath. I didn't think much of it. I was used to hiking alone sometimes, and it wasn't unusual for people to move at different paces. I just kept going, focused on the climb and the view ahead. Eventually, though, I realized I couldn't see either of them anymore. I turned back, calling their names, but there was no response. I was pretty sure I'd catch up to them soon. Maybe they had stopped for a break or were just a little further up the trail. But the trail kept going, and they didn't reappear. I walked for a while, calling out now and then, but the only sounds that answered me were the faint crunch of my boots on the gravel and the wind rustling through the trees. That's when I started to feel it. That nagging sense of being alone. It's not that I was scared exactly, but the feeling was off, you know? The park seemed bigger at night, quieter, more oppressive somehow. The shadows seemed deeper. And I started noticing things I hadn't before. Stray branches hanging over the path, weird sounds from the underbrush, the eerie stillness. I pushed the thoughts out of my head and kept walking. I figured I'd just get to the top, and if they weren't already there, I'd wait for them. But as I kept moving, it started to get darker. Really dark. The glow of the city was gone now, hidden behind the hills. The trail had gotten steeper, more uneven, and the sounds of the park at night had started to make me feel uneasy. After a while, I reached a point where the trail split. One path led higher, toward what I assumed was the summit, and the other led downward, down into a different part of the park. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep going, but I figured I should check in with Mark and Lisa first. So I decided to take the path back down, hoping to catch up with them before the trail became too confusing. I didn't get far before I saw something strange up ahead. A man. He was standing by the side of the trail, holding a flashlight, just standing there. At first, I thought maybe he was another hiker, someone else on a late-night adventure. But then I realized he wasn't moving at all. He was just standing there, staring into the darkness, like he was waiting for something. As I approached, I called out, "Hey, are you a ranger?" He turned his head, and I saw that his face was half shadowed by his flashlight, but I could make out his features. He was older, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, with graying hair and a rugged, outdoorsy look. He wore a dark green jacket, the kind I assumed a park ranger might wear. I figured he was just patrolling the area, making sure everything was okay. "Yeah, I'm a ranger," he said. His voice was steady, calm. Too calm, I thought. "What are you doing out here so late? You shouldn't be hiking alone after dark. It's not safe." I wasn't really worried at first. I mean, I had seen rangers before, and they often warned people about the dangers of hiking at night. But something about this guy made me uneasy. It wasn't his appearance. He looked like someone who belonged in the park. But there was something strange in his tone, something I couldn't quite place. "I'm just looking for my friends," I said, trying to sound casual. "We were hiking up, but I think we got split up. Have you seen two other people? One guy and a girl?" He stared at me for a long moment, his flashlight now aimed directly at my face. "No, haven't seen anyone else," he said, still not moving. "You should be careful. There's been reports of people getting lost out here. It's easy to get turned around in the dark. I can help you find your way back if you'd like." The way he said it made my skin crawl. It wasn't that he sounded aggressive or threatening, but there was something off in his manner. The way he spoke, like he was waiting for me to accept his offer, I felt a sudden need to leave. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, like I was walking into a trap. "No, I'm good," I said, stepping back. "I'm just going to keep looking for my friends." He didn't say anything as I started to turn away, but I could feel his eyes on me. I kept walking, my heart beating faster now, my mind racing. I wanted to get out of there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was following me. Every few seconds, I would hear the crunch of his boots in the distance, and I would turn around to see his flashlight still moving behind me. I didn't look back again. The path started to feel longer, the shadows deeper. I picked up my pace, adrenaline kicking in, but no matter how fast I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still following me, just out of sight. I kept looking for an exit, a way out of the trail, but everything felt so unfamiliar now. The darkness seemed to press in on me from all sides. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the main road leading down to the parking lot. I didn't stop. I just ran. I didn't look back. When I reached my car, I slammed the door behind me, hands shaking. It felt like hours before Mark and Lisa showed up. They didn't know what happened to me. They hadn't seen the man. They hadn't seen anyone. It was like I was the only one who experienced the whole thing. I told them about the man, about how he claimed to be a ranger, how weird the whole situation felt. I still wasn't sure what to think. He looked the part, and he spoke like someone in charge, but something didn't sit right with me. They didn't seem as shaken as I was. Mark brushed it off, saying it was probably just someone doing their job. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had that nagging feeling in my gut, the sense that I had barely escaped something. I still don't know if he was really a ranger or if he was something else altogether. Part of me wants to believe he was just a ranger out on patrol, but another part of me keeps telling me that wasn't right. My name is Emma Wright. I'm your typical California girl, born and raised with an affinity for the outdoors. I've always found peace in nature, a way to escape the clamor of daily life. When the weekend hits, I'm usually the first to pack my gear and head out into the woods or the hills. There's something about the rhythm of the earth, the fresh air, and the quiet hum of nature that clears my mind. But that Sunday, everything changed. It was early spring, one of those rare Sundays where I had the whole day off. The forecast mentioned a light drizzle, but nothing that seemed threatening. I didn't think much of it, just enough to cool things down, I thought. So I decided to try a new trail I'd read about near Big Bear Lake. The reviews described it as peaceful and mostly deserted, the perfect escape from the busy world. The trailhead wasn't crowded when I arrived, only a few cars in the lot. I parked and set out with a calm anticipation. The gray sky was overcast, but the rain hadn't started yet. The coolness in the air felt refreshing as I slipped on my pack, adjusting the straps. It had my usual essentials: water, a couple of snacks, a first aid kit, and a light jacket. I wasn't planning on hiking more than a few hours, just long enough to stretch my legs and clear my mind. The first part of the trail was just as advertised: peaceful and beautiful. Tall pines flanked both sides, their needles swaying gently in the breeze. The trail meandered through patches of wildflowers, and the forest was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling squirrels. I passed an older couple heading back to the parking lot, and we exchanged friendly nods. After that, I was alone, surrounded by nothing but the trees and the soft crunch of my boots on the dirt path. About an hour in, the drizzle began, light at first, but steady enough to dampen the ground. The trail became a little slipperier, but nothing I couldn't handle. The path narrowed and began to wind more steeply, with one side dropping down into a deep ravine. The trees here were denser, and the light seemed to fade despite it being only mid-afternoon. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it. That's when I noticed it. The birds had stopped chirping. The forest had fallen into an unnatural silence, a quiet that pressed in on me from all sides. I paused, scanning the trees, trying to pinpoint the source of the stillness. But there was nothing. The wind had died, and even the usual rustling of leaves seemed muffled. I told myself it was just the rain, that animals likely sought shelter when the weather turned, but the air felt thick, suffocating almost, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I continued, but the eerie quiet never left. Every now and then, I'd hear a faint snap of a twig or a rustle behind me, but when I turned around, I saw nothing. I tried to shake it off, blaming my nerves. It wasn't unusual for the forest to feel a little unsettling when you're out alone, and I was no stranger to these woods. Still, something didn't sit right. The trail got steeper, the mud slicker, and my steps more cautious. I was focused on keeping my footing when my foot slipped on a wet rock. I stumbled, my arms flailing as I grabbed for a tree branch. My heart pounded in my chest, but I regained my balance, shaking off the shock. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A flicker of movement. At first, I thought it was just the rain playing tricks with the shadows, but no, there was something out there, between the trees. I stopped, straining my eyes to see better. The figure was too distant to make out clearly, but I could feel its presence. "Hello?" I called out, my voice breaking the stillness. There was no response. I waited for a moment, my breath shallow, but the silence returned, even heavier now. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. Something was wrong. I told myself it was probably just a hiker ahead of me, but my feet started to move faster, almost on their own. The trail ahead seemed to narrow even further, and I was beginning to regret not turning back sooner. That's when I lost my footing. I slipped down the muddy slope, tumbling into the ravine below. The world spun in a dizzying blur, dirt, rocks, leaves, until I finally hit the ground with a sickening thud. I gasped for air, my body aching, mud splattered across my clothes, and then I saw him. At the bottom of the ravine, about 20 feet away, a man crouched near the base of a tree. His clothes were filthy, torn in places, his bare feet caked in dirt. He didn't move at first, but his eyes locked onto mine. Unblinking, wild, I froze. My mind raced. How long had he been there? Was he following me? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. He stood slowly, as though deliberate, trying not to startle me. But then I saw the glint of metal in his hand, a knife. My heart skipped a beat. Panic surged through me like ice water. I scrambled to my feet, my body slick with mud. I don't want any trouble," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't respond. He just started walking toward me, each step slow, deliberate. His grip tightened around the knife. I didn't wait for him to get any closer. My legs burned as I scrambled up the slope, hands scraping at the muddy earth. My breath was ragged, and the mud made every movement harder. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I heard him behind me. his footsteps getting closer, the squelch of his boots in the mud. I could feel his presence like a shadow on my back. I pushed harder, faster. I didn't care about the pain in my legs or the fear choking me. I just had to get to the top. When I finally made it to the trail again, I didn't stop. I ran, heart hammering in my chest, never looking back. The forest was nothing but a blur of trees, and I didn't dare slow down until I was back at the parking lot, breathless and trembling. There was only one car left, the one I'd arrived in. I jumped into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sped away before my brain could even process what had happened. I didn't report it. I don't know why. Maybe I was too scared to relive it, or maybe I was afraid no one would believe me. But the thought of that man, still lurking somewhere in those woods, haunts me. It started like any other solo hike I'd done 100 times before. I was in California, somewhere along the outskirts of the Sierra Nevada, on a trail that wasn't too famous, but still pretty well-trodden. The weather was perfect, clear skies, crisp air, everything you could want for a good hike. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape, a few hours in nature to clear my mind. I've hiked a lot, mostly alone. I love the solitude, the quiet of it all. There's something about being alone on a trail surrounded by nothing but trees, rocks, and mountains that gives you this sense of peace. Or at least it did before this happened. I was on this narrow, winding trail that cut through a dense stretch of pine trees. The kind of place where the ground was soft, covered in pine needles, and the only sounds were the occasional bird call and the crunch of my boots. The air smelled fresh, earthy, like wood and leaves. I was probably about halfway through the hike, my backpack still light, my water bottle half full, when I first noticed him. I'm not sure what made me look up, but there was this strange nagging feeling in the back of my head. I stopped, glanced over my shoulder, and noticed this figure far off in the distance. I couldn't see him clearly at first. It was just a silhouette, a shape moving among the trees. He wasn't too far away, but not close enough for me to make out any details. I thought maybe he was another hiker, so I didn't much attention at first. But the weird thing was, as I kept walking, I kept seeing the figure moving, just out of sight. When I'd look back over my shoulder, he'd be a little farther back, always at the edge of my view. Just enough to make me uneasy, like he was there but not really visible. At first, I convinced myself it was just a coincidence, maybe another hiker taking a different path or heading the same direction. But after a while, it started to get unsettling. It wasn't that I could see him clearly, but it was like he was deliberately staying out of my direct line of sight. Every time I stopped or slowed down for a moment, I'd glance back, and he'd be there, always at the edge of the trail or in between the trees, just far enough away for me to doubt what I was seeing. And I know how it sounds. It sounds like I was just paranoid, right? But there was something about the way he moved, something about the stillness around me that made my skin crawl. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe it was another hiker. Maybe he was just out there doing the same thing I was. I've seen plenty of people on the trails before, and it's not uncommon to pass them and then not see them for a while. But it felt different this time. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was following me. At some point, I decided to take a quick break, just to drink some water and clear my head. I found a small rock near the edge of the trail, sat down, and took a few deep breaths. But even though I was sitting down, I kept scanning the trees, half expecting to see the figure again. And that's when I saw him more clearly for the first time. He wasn't as far away as before. I could see his outline standing between the trees, just barely visible. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring in my direction. I didn't know what to do. My heart started racing. I felt a chill run down my spine, like the air suddenly got colder. I don't know how long I stared at him, but it felt like forever. I tried to shake it off, tried to tell myself that it was nothing, but I couldn't. I stood up quickly, ready to keep moving, but as soon as I started walking again, I realized something else. He wasn't just standing there anymore. He was walking too. Not in a hurry, but slowly. Just enough to stay in my peripheral vision. The worst part? He wasn't taking the main trail. He was moving through the trees, always just off the path, staying out of sight when I'd turn around, but still following. I was getting scared. I knew I was alone out here. The trail was remote. Not many people come out this way. There was no reason for anyone to be out here unless they were intentionally following me. The realization hit me all at once. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was out there, and they were watching me. I wanted to keep moving, but my legs felt like lead. I was trying to keep my composure, trying not to panic, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was being stalked. And the worst part was that I couldn't see his face, couldn't hear his footsteps, but I knew he was there. I kept walking, faster now, trying to get ahead, trying to lose him. Every time I glanced behind me, the figure was still there, always just out of view, staying behind the trees, moving in a way that made it clear he was trying to stay hidden, but also trying to stay close. I kept walking for what felt like hours, but the farther I went, the more the sense of dread crept over me. I knew I had to get to the end of the trail, but I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to take a break. I didn't want to risk being out of breath, sitting down, and giving him a chance to catch up. Eventually, my foot caught on a rock, and I stumbled, almost falling to the ground. I cursed under my breath and paused to tie my shoe. As soon as I knelt down, the silence around me was suffocating. I wasn't thinking, just trying to focus on getting my shoelace tied. But then something made me look up. I looked to my left, and from behind the bushes, he lunged at me. I barely saw him coming, but the way he moved so fast, the terror hit me all at once. I froze for a second, my body numb. He was right there, so close, I could almost feel his breath on my skin. Instinct kicked in. I grabbed a rock, anything I could reach, and swung it as hard as I could. I didn't care if it hurt him, I just needed to escape. The rock hit him square in the chest, and I saw him stumble back. That was all I needed. I didn't look back. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears, the sound of my boots pounding against the dirt. I could hear him behind me for a moment, but the more I ran, the farther I got. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, where I flagged down a passing car. I don't know who that guy was. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if I was just lucky or if I did something right, but I know this. I'll never be hiking alone in those woods again. I've never told anyone the full story. People always think I'm exaggerating or that I was just imagining things, but I know what happened, and I won't ever forget that feeling. The feeling of being watched, the feeling of being followed, the feeling that someone was out there just waiting for me to stop. And I swear, if I hadn't hit him with that rock, I'm not sure I'd be here to tell you about it. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.